Welcome to Steam Powered, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Dr. Nicole Tschierske. Nicole is a coach, facilitator, and change manager who helps experts and teams in STEM do better work. Join us as I talk about Nicole's STEM journey, sustainable mental health in the workplace, and how we can do better work. So thank you so much, Nicole, for joining me today on Steam Powered. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today about your work and, making work better.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, for having me.
Great. So, even though this is a different sort of work that you're doing now, you started off in chemistry and food sciences. So how did you get into that to begin with?
I always, even as a child in school, I always liked the sciences best. Well, the sciences like biology and chemistry. I never could warm up to mathematics and physics. That is somehow my brain is not wired to truly understand it. But like I said, biology and chemistry, I just always really liked and I found so fascinating and interesting. And when the time came to select what I wanted to study, then those were my go-to choices. And I didn't want to study pure chemistry. That seemed not as appealing or interesting. So I wanted to do either pharmacy or biochemistry. But for pharmacy, I would have had to go to a university in a city that I just didn't want to go to that city, basically.
Yeah.
And for biochemistry, my school grades weren't good enough. And it's like I missed by 0.5. So, okay, I don't know the grading system in Australia or anywhere around the world. Anyway, it was close.
It was close.
and but it wasn't enough. And so as a backup to have something in that area, my mother I don't know how mothers always know what's best. My
Thank
mother
you.
had suggested, why don't you apply for food chemistry? I was in a great city in Dresden in Germany, and it had this aspect of doing something. It has something to do with life, has something to do with biology, with chemistry, but it wasn't the pure technical aspects, but something very very in touch with everyday life, which I found fascinating. And so that's what I then studied. And it was really, the first 2 years was really about the basics of chemistry. And then the remaining 2 years were deep dives into everything food sciences. So the technology, analytics, looking at packaging, cosmetics. So
Oh, wow.
anything that is in Germany under the regulation of the food authorities, and this includes cosmetics, for example, packaging for food products, textiles, these kind of things.
That's fascinating. So, what sort of purview does food sciences actually entail? It's not clearly just about what we eat and what we consume, but
Yeah,
how does that scope
the
work?
the intention. So again, there's a law in Germany that regulates um, anything around food, water, pet food, and any other kind of let's say things things that we use. I completely lack the
Just
English
consumables.
word for Bedarfsgegenstände is the German word. So I'm sure everybody understood that. So things that we use in daily life. So that can be food packaging, that can be cooking utensils, that could be like dishes, especially if those things are made of plastic. There's regulation about and then also when it comes to baby toys, it's like having things that get in touch with the mouth a lot, because then there are limits for, let's say, what kind of certain compounds you can put in that you need for processing sometimes and to create the product, but they shouldn't leak, for example,
Yeah.
into the mouth, or they shouldn't leak into the food that is packaged. And so all of this is described and regulated. And when you have a law like this, ideally you have people who can analyze and observe if all of the food complies, that there are no, the pesticide levels don't exceed any threshold, all these kind of things. And that is what originally the study area of food chemistry was established for,
Mm.
to educate those people who then work in the governmental laboratories to analyze all these things.
Yeah.
And but it's not the only and some portion of the people who study go into those laboratories, but analytics was never so interesting for me. Instead, I really liked the understanding how things work, but then creating something out of it. So really going more in the industry into product innovation, but still taking all that knowledge with me.
That is amazing. So, what sort of work did you do for your PhD? Like, it really must have fascinated you enough to take it to that level.
Yeah, I was actually researching deodorants of all things. So again, it's about it's part of food chemistry area,
Mm.
or the law that it also covers cosmetics. And so I was at a cosmetics company in the deodorant department, and when you have like those roll-on deodorants, when you look at the formulations, sometimes they are transparent, sometimes they are like white milky, and that is just a base formulation to carry any active ingredient.
Mm.
And inside those active ingredients, they are there to be antiperspirant, so to reduce sweating, or yeah, basically deodorizing. So they reduce the number of bacteria on your skin, so the ones that break your sweat into those smelly compounds.
Mm.
So to reduce the body odor that you
Yes.
you know just bring into the world. And there are different types of active ingredients that we can use for reducing the bacteria on our skin. And what they saw was that some of them worked quite nicely in those milky white formulations. But when you put the same ingredient into those transparent ones, then they lost all their effectiveness.
Mm.
And that is not something that you want as a manufacturer. Yeah? You want to know that if you put something in, and ideally when you have a compound that works and that people mm, get used to being in deodorants, for example, then you
Yeah, you
want
get
to use
attached
it
to
across
products.
as
Yeah.
many. Yeah, you want to use it in as many formulations as you can. And so my research was about finding out what's happening there. And so it was a really, really great blend of, well, first of all, creating lots of formulations,
Mm.
doing a lot of physical measurements. So X-ray diffraction, NMR I can't even talk. It's very, so for everyone who's listening, it's very early for me in the morning. So NMR spectroscopy. Um, what else did we do? We looked at, yeah, just rheology of, so if I put in different amounts of the same active ingredient, how does this influence viscosity, for example? I looked under the microscope just to see how any structural changes that we might have, but then also testing the efficacy,
Mm.
with, for example, bacteria in the lab. So you would have a bacterial suspension, put a little bit of the formulation in it, and then incubate it, and after a while you count the bacteria, and you would see literally how many there are left that are living. And then there was also in vivo testing, so having a study with people where they would come and I would apply on them the deodorant. So it's just really fun. And then
Scientifically
again here we
applied.
would take samples from the top of their, I mean, we wouldn't take skin of them, but we would like uh, rinse off the skin and
Yes.
collect that, and to analyze how many bacteria were left. And then there was also a what was called sniffing panel, so meaning um, people would we would have a left-right comparison for them, and then there were trained sniffers, they are
Yeah.
called, and they would just sniff, like which smells more, which smells less. And so we were looking at those things from all different angles, and in the end it all came together to a really great picture. So I could I could see a very consistent picture in how was it in vitro, so the efficacy in the bacterial suspension that correlated with what we saw in vivo, so on the persons, and that also correlated with the analytical results that I got it, and I could even I could even not only show how this correlates, but there were even I found an explanation for why it works in one and not the other.
That's
And
very cool.
yeah, that was really great. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my God. That was a trip down memory lane because it's like
It would have
over
been a
10
while.
years ago now that I
Yeah.
did that.
I know. I'm sorry to make you trek all the way back, but that's really interesting. Like the problem solving aspect and being able to just keep creating these formulations and just adjusting in increments to figure out what's going on. That's very cool. I do like that as
Yeah,
I
and
can
it
see
has
that.
such
Yeah.
an applicability, which is still to this day. I love reading front end research. Also, now I'm doing more things in the psychology area as a very broad term. And even here, I love reading the front end research. But what I'm fascinated to do on my, for myself in my own work is using what researchers find and then apply it and make use of in daily life. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the research is being done for a reason and all of this work is just going to help everybody else's work down the track, and that's very cool. Yeah. So, from, actually being a scientist in, frontline kind of level of work to now trying to make sure that, other people can do their work better. How do we get to that transition right there? And what motivated you?
Mm. Well, it was more a crisis than a motivation. Sometimes it needs that. I don't know. Maybe it was a sign from the universe. So I had been working in a company for a while in product innovation, creating new products, and I loved that job. But then there were internal restructurings, merger with another company. Long story short, the end result was that um, I was affected like a few others of my colleagues in such a way that my job was made redundant. So there was a period of 6 months where I had nothing to do because I waited for my job to become redundant. And then the new job that I transitioned into didn't give, but which was still in the science area, didn't give me as much work as I was used to. And over the 12 to 18 months that this whole period took, being at only 10% of my capacity, this is horrible for someone who likes to work, and you feel so
Yeah.
useless and everything. And anyway, so instead of a burnout, I developed a bore out and I needed help. And so I looked for a coach to help me because I just didn't see any way out anymore. I thought I tried everything to change my situation. And within 4 sessions, I started to feel better, Of course, the situation was still the same, but I started to feel
Clarity.
the greater sense of agency again
Mm.
and get new ideas of what else I might try to improve things and so on. And I was like, how did he do that? I want to be able to do that too for people. And that is when I started coaching training. Um, and from there, it was just a rabbit hole. I found a completely fascinating new area that, to be interested in. And that also led to me transitioning within the company into a different area, then doing change management for those kind of transformation or change projects that were going on, which I'm still doing to this day. And on the side, I set up my own coaching business. And what I have found, so I explored different kinds of topics, of course, especially at the beginning, you look very broadly, and then sometimes something catches your attention. Where for me, it's always like, why are things so bad if we know how we can do it better? And
Yes.
when I came across this research of it's called the job demands resources model, and it's over 2 decades of research that went into, and that started off with research on burnout and how does that happen. And now they have a whole those scientists, Arnold Bakker and Evangelia Demaruti, who first came up with this. They have a huge body of research around this, and they have developed a whole theory around it, and it's just so fascinating, and it's super applicable to use in our daily lives. And the idea is, well, yes, what contributes to our stress can be also personal factors, can be things like, if we don't eat healthy, if we don't sleep well enough, these kind of things. But work and the way work is designed and how we live through our day at work has such an enormous contribution to our levels of stress, to our propensity to go into burnout, but also how motivated and engaged we feel. And this is a lever that is complete. Well, maybe this is a generalization here, but from what I'm seeing and hearing, it's completely ignored, or at least not intentionally addressed in companies. And if we would address that, not only would people feel better,
Hmm.
but they would also do better work, because if we do well when we feel good. And so I'm going to stop here. So that is that journey, and to my fascination of why and how I want to help others do better work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of those things where, as the way that we view our life and our work has changed over the last few decades. People keep talking about how we do need to have work-life balance. And, that's true. We do need to have work-life balance, but both will bleed into each other. And it's about having to have both work complementary and harmony together. So, of course, when you talk about change management, when you talk about process management at work, it's not just about the work, it's about the people as well. And, how we help people to manage those processes because it affects them outside of the office too.
Oh yes, yes, you definitely have a spillover effect. And And still, I would argue that work-life balance as an idea. So, for the sake of this conversation, let's define it as we have enough time for private life, for recreation, for replenishing our energy, for doing things that are fun, but also for caring for our life. And because there are duties and obligations in that area too. So let's
Yes.
say that is somehow in a good weighted balance with work. So instead of working 40 hours a week or even more, and let's say we work 30 hours a week, I would argue that those 30 hours in a week could still be designed in a way that drains us so much that there's no recovering from it.
Mm.
And then even if you have a good weekend in between, when you come to Monday, just seeing the building front door might completely like suck the life out of you.
Yeah.
so um so even if we have work life balance, even if we have the opportunity to replenish our energy, I still believe there's much to be gained to lower or decrease those factors that cause us stress and strain at work, and at the same time increase those factors that fuel our motivation and engagement and make work fun. And I'm not arguing for mm, you know work needs to be the center of your life and you have to define the purpose of your life through your work. Not everybody has to do that, but still it should be in such a way that we like spending time there. And yeah, I
Yeah,
just hate to see people being miserable each day just because they have to earn a living.
absolutely. And yeah, it's one of those things where you don't want to end up in a position where, even though you do have the actual time balanced, that time isn't spent effectively in both areas. Like, you're toiling away at work only to come back to recharge just enough to continue toiling back at work again. And
Yeah.
yeah, as you said, we can't do the work well when our head's not in the right, well, not in the game, because we're there trying to keep up all the time or just trying to keep our head above water.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, things are just so much more, um, they take so much more effort to complete. We are a lot more touchy, and then there's more conflict at work and misalignment. We make more mistakes, and all of this has an impact on the business and how the business performs. So it's even in the company's interest to look at those things.
so how do we make better work then?
Like I said, as a basis, I really like using this job demands resources model, which on one hand side looks for what aspects or elements of your work are there that need your sustained effort and energy, and do they really need to be there and to that extent? And at the same time, uh, looking at those resources that we would have or could have available at work that give us energy and that motivate us and that help us achieve our goals, and are we intentionally creating those? And for everyone who wants to learn more about this, we can give a few examples, but I have created like a PDF guide to this with like also little assessment for both the stress factors and the motivation factors, and we can share the link to download
Absolutely.
that. Um, and but just as an example, a lot of those stress factors that we can experience are things like high workload. So, and then we can look, okay, where's this high workload coming from? And sometimes it's because unexpected things happened and we just have to cope with them to keep the business running. And that might happen. But it might also come from, are we taking on too much? Are we, do our ambitions meet our capacity to go for those ambitions? Do we have the workforce and the headspace available to go after 5, 10, 15 very important strategic projects at the same time? Or should we maybe just start with 3 and get them done? But then as a third option is the workload can come from inefficient processes. So where there's work that is being done that is not outdated, or that could be that is manual today, that could be at least partially be automated. Sometimes it's double work, it's ineffective collaboration between departments. um, it is mistakes that are happening because and where you have ping pong between departments when when you have a handover point within a process, when someone says, okay, I request something from you, please give it to me. Okay, in order to give it to you, I need to have this and this information, and then I give only part of the information back. And all of this is just takes up time. And so if we were to look at how our ways of working designed, then we could reduce this as a stress factor. Or for bureaucracy, how many hoops do you have to jump through in order to get things done? We can also look at the physical environment. So, do I have a proper chair? Is there proper lighting? And then now with moving to, this idea of collaborative spaces and open plan office, and then when you have 30 people sitting there all next to each other and everyone on the phone, that noise level, it just takes your like more effort to concentrate on what you're doing and who you're listening to under your headphones.
Hmm.
And just again, it adds to depleting your energy. And so, is all of this really necessary, or can we find ways here and there to tweak those environments? So that would be, ideas on how we can, first of all, help us feel better, do better, have more energy, to be more focused. All these kind of things on the individual level, but at the same time, it improves collaboration, uh, it reduces conflict, it, yeah, and improved processes. There's a win for everybody in this.
Absolutely. And, all the things that you described, it's So many different factors. It's a really holistic view of the way that
Mm.
we do interact within an
Yeah.
organization, because it isn't just about your literal work processes. It's about the environment, and it's about how the environment helps facilitate all of that interaction, that communication, and the relationship building when it comes to being able to create more efficient processes. And yeah, so much involved there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a
you
bit
know
like
it
in nutrition, where when people when you say, okay, how do you eat healthily? Okay, I need a lot of this vitamin, or I need a lot of protein, or I need a lot of whatever, fibers, for example, and then you like with this, you could you could mix food that has like, I don't know, a spoonful of vitamin C, because you can buy that pure. It has a spoonful of protein powder, and it has a spoonful of, I don't know, flax seeds. So is that a healthy, nutritious meal that you can eat all of the time? No, it's like there are so many aspects and variety. And as soon as we start to, singling things out is super valuable for research, because then you control other variables and you can really start to understand more what impact this one thing, it's like what what effect does working with your strengths more have on how you perform? What effect does having a better sense of meaning or purpose have on your motivation? So, singling those things out for research is incredibly valuable. And I love all those insights that has generated over the past years. But to think that, okay, I have read a book on my organization needs more purpose, and then just to create a purpose statement, and think, now everything is peachy. It's just not. Life is more nuanced and complex than that. And so we need to really always look at the individual situation and see what's working and what do we want to improve.
So with all of these, parts, where do you begin when you look into a new system that it is systems analysis. You're looking at an ecosystem
Mm,
in the organization to take it apart to figure out, you know, where these improvements can be made. So where do you begin?
yeah. So again, I'm a scientist, so I start by gathering facts and then analyzing them.
Hmm.
And I like doing that together with the people that, have hired me, basically. So um, a colleague and I, we ran a training on, improving, well, we call it a stress and resilience training, and it has aspects of, how to manage your own stress and how to increase your own resilience. But there are a lot of things about what I just shared. How can we look at and redesign the work that we do? And so it has three modules. In the first one, we have a part that is using the basis of this job demands resources model. So we explain the model. So there are those stress factors, there are those motivation factors. We give some examples, and then we send them off into breakout rooms and say, okay, brainstorm, what concrete examples do you see in your work environment or in your daily work that are either on one side or on the other side? And then we come back and we collect them. And typically, things like having team support, feeling appreciated, getting things done, having moments of flow, these kind of things, they show up on the resources side. So that are really those motivating factors. And then on the stress factor side, the job demands, they have things like demanding customers, not feeling appreciated for your work or feeling your work doesn't matter, having super high expectations to oneself, or all those different communication tools. So in one company, you might have a gazillion different systems through which you communicate about one project on, and people say, I don't even know where to go anymore. And then this expectation from others that I should reply in an instant. And so we collect those things, and then from there we look at, okay, so where do we want to start? What's the biggest pain that we want to solve? But also, what are the quickest wins to increase those resources to feel more motivated and energized?
Absolutely. And a lot of the things you described there, it does begin with the internal. So all the individuals are thinking about it from their own contexts. And,
Mhm.
it's trying to be able to express that in a way where it can be something that your managers and your organization can also hook into to be able to, I guess, make those improvements in a not purely business revenue generating way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
brilliant. So, once you've actually gathered all of that, how a lot of companies, whenever they start doing these things, and they're told, we need to make sure that, our people feel better, that they're being more motivated, that they're happy to be at work. And then you end up with these, different methods of data collection. You have surveys and you have, team building activities, or, they'll, organize socials and things like that. And, some of those things fixes some problems, but not others. And a lot of the time, you'll find that the solutions they come up with, they feel like band-aids or just,
Mm.
shallow attempts. So how do you get them to dig a bit deeper with that?
You're absolutely right. So there's one organization that I worked with who asked me, or who said to me, hey, like once a year we do this survey, and we also ask people to rate their perception of their own well-being, and the score was really low. And the HR manager was puzzled because man, we have the newsletter, we have all kinds of financial perks that we give to them, we hand out vitamins, we have like, they had a whole array of of things that they do in order to help people's well-being. And people were really frustrated. So we had this kind of exploratory workshop to really understand what's lying underneath, where's this coming from, and to hear from people themselves, why might they think the score is so low, what might contribute to that, and so on. And what came out of this conversation was, okay, thank you for those offerings, but like you said, they feel a bit tokenistic, when in fact the source of my frustration and stress at work is not coming from not having enough tips on how to care for my mental health, but it's coming from how things are being done around here. And the biggest aspects that came through were the communication wasn't, people just didn't feel well enough informed, or they felt that whenever they voiced an idea, that they had the feeling it kind of like disappeared into limbo and nothing came out of it. And so elements like this, and also then how they related to the leadership team, not to their direct manager, but to the leadership team, really. And from there, we then did a second workshop to dive deeper into that. And we looked into concrete, first of all, things that they would ask the organization to improve. So discerning what is already working well, what do we want to keep, but then also what should be different, what would help us to feel better informed and, less stressed, because I know where to go for what kind of information, and I feel I'm really part of this organization here and not kept in the dark. And but also we looked at what can people themselves do, and what kind of attitude or mindset change might help here, to so that everybody contributes to that positive change. And then I fed that back to the HR manager, and he really took it on with the leadership team as well. They improved their communication strategy. So it really needs action on the organization
Yes.
side, because if you ask for feedback and then you don't do anything with it, I mean, how compelled will people feel in the future to
Mm,
continue to give you feedback,
yeah.
so but they really did the work. And so within 6 months, about 6 months from that first workshop that I did with them, to then having it was like one last check-in, seeing how things have gone. First of all, there were factual improvements that people recognized the effort and how structural things have changed, that you could like really see. But at the same time, I also felt, when I was on the call with them, I viscerally felt that change in mood and energy, and they were much more, yes, I can contribute, yes, I can make a difference, yes, there are still things to go, but we're talking now, and we're moving in the right direction, and we really appreciate all the effort that has been done. And It was a complete night and day difference. Like, great, So again, there was a team that it seemed like, um, was struggling with not knowing how to care for their well-being or their mental health. And so the easiest thing would be just to slap more resources at them. It's like, here's another online learning, here's another this, here's another that. But nobody needs more tips. we need to we need to make changes and go to the root causes and improve those, to to just reduce those stress factors.
Exactly. And it's great because so many organizations as well, once they start on this thing, like they do the survey, there's no follow-up. And then, they start the follow-up, but then it's kind of tokenistic. But even if they do start larger initiatives, you also need to be able to follow up. Like you need to be able to measure whether what you're doing is actually effective at what you set out to do to begin with. So, it's making those changes and making sure that those are the changes people are actually wanting and, following through with it and making and allowing people to, feel that when they do ask for things and, are seeking change and proactive about making it happen, that they're seeing the same kind of energy back from their employers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Surveys are really great, in the way that they are easily scalable. If you always use the same questions, you can have this comparison over time. You can, with all the analytics that's possible today, you can break it down per team or per department, and you can see, okay, where are we doing better than in other places? What maybe needs greater attention from our side? But it's only quantitative data, and you always need to pair, in order to take meaningful action, you need to always pair quantitative data with qualitative insights, and those you can only get when you start talking to people, and not talking to people to confirm your suspicion, but really going on a fishing expedition and be like really open as to what you might find, and then willing to go where this inquiry takes you.
Exactly. And, there's so many things where, there might be, certain issues that are particularly relevant to them, but that's not the actual problem. It's just a symptom. So unless you keep talking, unless you keep digging, unless you're prepared to kind of go fishing, you won't know what the actual problems are because it could be something entirely unexpected that you weren't aware of to begin with as potential problem. Very interesting. And there is so much psychology involved and it really is problem solving on a different level. Cool.
Yeah, problem solving, but also, but in problem solving, we tend to, and that is super useful for when we look at processes and when we look at systems. The way we go about it is where we look at what's happening, and then we try and find the root cause for what's happening,
Mm,
and where we look for the root cause of failure. When it comes to humans, what we find is that it is much more energizing and appreciative to not look for what's wrong with them, but then to also look for, what's already working, what is the positive core that we can build upon, and then start to magnify that. So
mm,
creating change can come from fixing things, but it can definitely, when it comes to people, the vast majority of initiatives, we should really build in this appreciative way to find what's working and increase that. And instead of like, what do we want to get away from, and what are those root causes of failure, really define what do we want to move towards to, and what are the root causes of success. Because for every system, for every company, for every team, there are already those stories, those experiences, those, "Oh, remember when this great thing happened?" So, okay, it has happened before. So let's take that as an example. Let's explore what are the root causes of success here, and then let's see how we can replicate that, and maybe migrate those ideas into other places, transfer them on other challenges that we face or things we want to create. So those would be two different ways of going about creating better work. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a great perspective as well, because, a lot of people see change management as doing out with the bad and, starting over again, starting from scratch. But yeah, as you said, we don't always need to rebuild from the bottom up. There's always going to be elements that we can build on already, which are good. And it's, just
Mhm.
refining those particular aspects to make them better still.
Yeah, and to add a last or an additional dimension to this is also to use all those opportunities to stimulate growth.
Mm,
Not growth in terms of revenue. Of course, if that happens, that's great for a company.
best
But
benefit.
growth as an organization. How can we grow individually through those journeys and through those challenges? How can we grow collectively as a team, but also as a business? How can we get to greater levels of maturity in terms of how we operate? And I whenever I get to know other people, people who work at companies that are different than mine, and or have worked at other companies, sometimes also the big names that you know of, and we all know how those, even the biggest, most professional corporate, how they represent themselves, and how they, what they share about their business to the outside world. So we
Mm,
see the shareholder reports, we see how their social media um, presentations, all these kind of things, and it always, and we see the job ads that they post, and what they expect of candidates and what great things you get to do there and so on. And then you go and talk to people who work at those big companies, and inside it is nowhere near as shiny. And sometimes they just say, like, you know I came to this company expecting it would be better than in my old one, but honestly, I am shocked as to how badly processes are run here. I am surprised that there are still any compliant or any great products even falling off the conveyor belt. It's just, yeah, and I hear that over and over again, that there's often such a mismatch. It's like, how is that even for a company? It's like, I always think, okay, if this was my company, how acceptable would I find that things are run this way? And you know, I guess we're all doing the best we can with what we have. But I sometimes have the impression when I talk to people that the focus is on too many shiny objects instead of getting the basics right, that build the solid foundation.
mm. And that's very important as well, because it is true. Like what we convey or what the companies convey to the public is not necessarily going to be the same culture that is internal. And that's the most important part about any organization. You want to be able to work in a place where you've got a good culture, where you've got one that is conducive for everyone to grow as an individual or as a contributor, or however it is you want it
Mhm.
to improve and grow as a company. And that comes down again to, does your brand identity match your organizational culture? And that is all about all of these things with processes and making sure that you are listening to your people, that you are providing ways for them to be able to help achieve the culture that you present to everyone else. And yeah, that's it's something where I have spoken to other people, and they're talking about interviewing with other companies and saying, this looks really good on the outside, but you know every company's the same, and that's really dire. Like when when you end up with people so jaded to go, well, what we see on the surface, we know never to expect that. That's really quite, it's quite painful. And
Yeah, it's a
how
bit
can
sad.
you?
It's
It
true.
is. And it's all the more important about why we need to be able to create spaces for culture to develop in a way where they feel good inside and out, and people from the outside come in don't feel this dissonance with what they see and what they experience.
Mhm.
Yeah. So much work to do.
That's true.
Yeah.
But
So,
it's work that is fun for me, so I don't mind continue
absolutely.
doing it.
Yeah. So, what is the most fun for you about doing this work?
My I'm not gonna say my idol, but in terms of how I want to show up, a little bit of a role model for me is always Mary Poppins. And so the work that I do, I consider a little bit the same like what Mary Poppins does. So while you think she's there to help the children, in fact, she's helping everyone, but not helping in the sense of give that to me, I will solve that for you. I mean, if she needs to, she will step in and help out. But she's really more a guide to them in terms of, you know, just being there, helping them think through, giving them a little bit of a nudge of what they might try, but still letting them, go on their own journey, make their own mistakes, uncover what's true for them and how they, create the life that those children and their parents want to create. And yeah, she's basically just there to help them not stand in their own way, kind of. And that is what I enjoy a lot, So it's really great work. It's very comforting for me to know that I don't have to have the answers for everyone, but also know that just by asking the right questions and creating a space of where people can talk to each other in a structured way, that leads to something other than blaming, or that leads to something other than going around in circles, but really starting to think in new ways. I can help them, yeah, find out what's true for them, what's great about how they already work together, and what might be possible for um, for when they take action. And that is in finding creative ways. So instead of having, I do work with standardized trainings and so on. And when it's about skill building, those things really do help. But what I enjoy the most is just sit together with the teams like, hey, we just merged two teams, and we want to become one, and we want to make sure we work in the most effective way possible. Can you help us get there? And it's like, and then I can go and be creative, think about, okay, how would I set up this workshop? How would I facilitate this journey? What question do I need to ask? What things do they need to uncover for themselves in order to make those judgment calls, which next step to take, and so on. So I like the creativity, and then, just being there, giving them the room to talk, to think through things, and then in the end, seeing them being completely motivated. It's like, hey, we have a great action plan. We really want to get to this goal, and feeling, and they're feeling so much more empowered because it's all they're doing,
Yeah.
and they're growing through that, and I I just love it.
Yeah, being able to help others feel empowered to, affect change in
Mhm.
places where, they don't normally, or at the time, don't normally feel that they can. Yeah, that must be very energizing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we should probably continue on along these lines of, your own little personal journey. Moving on to some of those extra questions. So, what hobby interest do you have that is most unrelated to your field of work?
I guess it's going hiking, or going for walks in nature. Um, it's really, there's this weird effect that you can, so you probably know the feeling is like the mind is always spinning and always busy. But when you walk for a long, you don't have to walk fast or anything, but just for long enough. And typically for me, that points comes after 2.5 and 3 hours of walking. Up until then, there's always still some train of thought going, and my mind is jumping. I have to think about this, and I have to ponder that, and so on. But then after 2.5 and 3 hours, all that goes away, and I'm just there. And this is such a, it's like a mini vacation for my brain. And so going hiking and marveling at nature, and now I really love that, we're in spring now. Things start to get a bit more colorful. There's green coming out, and flowers everywhere. So that's just really great.
Yes, that sounds like a really great reset just to be able to, you know, reboot the brain for a little while. It's great. Ooh. It's also, yeah, hiking in Germany sounds wonderful.
Yeah, there are some magical places. I know other countries are fascinating too, but Germany is not half bad.
It's not bad at all. Okay, and which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
Childhood book. I guess the only book that I can remember reading as a child for book report was it's called Mit Hagenbeck im Dschungel. So Hagenbeck was an explorer, I think, and he went into the jungle into I believe it was Africa, and he in this book he described um, just basically what he saw and what he observed, and there was a lot about elephants, and it was I was so fascinated. The book was already it was like half torn. It was a really old book already then, and but I loved reading it, and it was so touching for me to read about how elephants live in a herd, and then there would be a special place where they go when they notice, okay, it's like I'm gonna die soon because I'm
Mm,
very old, and then they would go there, and how the others would mourn them and so on. And that was like, I think that was the first time um, I was somehow introduced to the ideas of that animals have those emotions and those
mm,
social relations too, because typically animals are talked about very clinically. So
yeah.
for among people who don't know much about that, but then to be in that story with those elephants, that was really great.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And as a child, when you first come to understand that animals are social beings as well, and they do have these communities and interactions, that has to have been, quite, yeah, enlightening as a
Mhm.
revelation. Yeah, such a great story. And lastly, what advice would you give someone who would like to do what you do, or what should they ignore?
Find ways to start doing it in your daily like where you are right now. So you don't have to change jobs first, or you don't have to set up your own business first to get to do things, but look around at where you are. Can you volunteer? Can you experiment on your family? Can you just the place where you work, is there, like, if you want to host workshops, okay, offer to host a 1 hour, 1.5 hour workshop on a certain topic. So, just find those opportunities to dabble in that, and sprinkle that around your life like little seeds. And then over time, if you feel it's fun for you and if you want to pursue this further, then you can find ways to grow those seeds.
Yeah, it's such a good idea. And a lot of people, they're sort of, I guess, side hustles. A lot of people are now trying to explore things outside of work. And it's not necessarily stuff that's completely unrelated, but in some cases it is. But it's being able to try and find ways to explore these other avenues of interest that you have. And, if you do want to develop skills in those areas, it's, just giving it a try and having a little bit of a
Mhm.
dabble and, testing things out. It's a good way of being able to just explore other opportunities that might be available to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Nicole, for speaking with me today. It has been absolutely wonderful learning about all the work that you do in helping other people do their work better and other organizations to help facilitate that. So if people would like to learn more about what you do, where can they go?
Okay, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can go to my website, so that it's nicoletschierske.com. It's very hard to spell, so I will put the link in the
Yep,
show
links
note
will be in the
probably.
notes.
Yeah, and then that resource that I mentioned is nicoletschierske.com/stress. And oh yeah, and also I have a podcast out too. It's called Better Work, and you've been a guest. The episode, as of this recording, your episode hasn't been released yet, but it's in the queue. So yeah, you can also listen to the podcast.
Brilliant. Such a great round of resources. Okay, well, thank you again so much, Nicole, for joining me today, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you, Michelle, especially for those past focused questions that took me back to really great and nice times of my life. So I think this can only become a good day today now.
Ah, wonderful. Such a great start. Okay, thank you.
Bye.
It's a sad fact, but becoming disillusioned or facing burnout at work is not an uncommon experience. But it's been helpful to hear from Nicole about some of the ways that we can affect effective change in the workplace, both as individuals and as employers, so that we can do our best work and keep loving what we do. To learn more about Nicole and what we discussed on the show, or to connect with us, please visit the Steampowered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also find out more about Nicole and her work on her website, nicoletschierske.com, LinkedIn, and her podcast, The Better Work Podcast, the links for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to the show, leave a comment, or share this with your geeky or geek-curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon and Ko-fi under Steam Powered Show, the links for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.